Good morning, friends. This is Lindsay Cross, Government Relations Director at Florida Conservation Voters, and I'm so pleased to be bringing another outdoor exploration to you. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by my friend and St. Pete historian and guru, Monica Kile, who is the Executive Director of the Preserve the Burg, which is a nonprofit here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And welcome, Monica. How are you this morning?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to this today. This should be fun.
That's awesome. Awesome. So you are going to take us on a little virtual tour of St. Pete and show us some of the cultural and historically significant sites. I know we've only got about 20 or 30 minutes to do this. So we'll see as much as we can, but we wanted to bring you on to talk about the importance of preservation and its significance to us as community members. This is National Preservation or National Historic Preservation Month, so we thought we would include our outdoor exploration to have some of that historic significance. So can you first tell us just a little bit about your background and your role at Preserve the Burg, and kind of what your mission is, and helping the community understand the importance of preservation?
Sure. I've been in St. Pete almost 20 years, I think 17 or 18 years now. I moved here for graduate school to do the Florida Studies program, and in pretty short order got roped into doing historic tours of downtown St. Pete with what was then called St. Pete Preservation, and just fell in love with it, fell in love with the history of the city. It's such a unique place in Florida. And really through my involvement with doing tours, I learned about historic preservation and really the importance of maintaining the things in your community that make you unique and make people want to come and see you and be there and visit or live there, particularly in a place like Florida where tourism is so huge. If we don't preserve those places that make us special, then people will go somewhere else that is special. People want to go to a place that's unique and different from where they're from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Monica, I'm going to ask you to move your screen just a little bit so we can see your whole face and not just the...
Okay, I was trying to show
Perfect.
you the sign. Yeah. I was showing you the sign behind me. Okay.
Yeah. So I know we're going to take about 20, 30 minutes for this tour. So we want to let you walk and show us some places. But I like that you started out by talking about the importance of place and special places, because we in the conservation voter community are always looking for ways to protect special places in our state. And that includes natural and wild areas, but it also includes places that invite people to come into the outdoors, whether that's a waterfront park like we have in St. Pete, or whether that's something deep into the Everglades or a cypress swamp, or a cool clear 72-degree spring, someplace in Central Florida.
Yeah.
So
that next week, actually.
Wonderful. Good. Well, tell us first of all where you are, and a couple of the places where you think you're going to take us, and I'll be asking some questions as we go along. We've got a chat box here, so if people want to ask some questions, we'll do our best to answer that and make sure that people are engaged and feel like they're really immersed in this tour. So start us off with where you are in St. Pete and why this is why you chose this to start this tour.
Yeah, no, I thought your introduction was perfect, because the place that I am is really kind of the birthplace of our waterfront park system, which from its very beginning was envisioned to get people outside enjoying the beautiful waterfront in downtown St. Pete. So can you see that sign behind me? I'm at Demon's Landing Park, which really probably should be pronounced Demon's Landing, because it's named after a man named Pyotr Demenchev, or as he became known, Peter Demens, who was a Russian aristocrat who was exiled from outside of St. Petersburg, Russia, because he was loosely implicated in the plot to kill the Tsar. And he came, they don't like that. So they kicked him out, and he came to own a railroad in Florida and decided he wanted to bring it to the Pinellas Peninsula. So when he did that, he ended up buying some land, or getting some land, from a man named John Williams, and they became the co-founders of the city of St. Petersburg. The Demon's Landing Park, where I'm standing now, and I'm going to flip the camera around so I can give you a little perspective on the park.
Great.
Let me see here. Hold on. There we go. this was actually the site of the railroad pier. So when
Mm.
Peter Demons brought the railroad here, the passengers would get off on along well, really where Central Avenue, where the Caddy's restaurant is now, where the Detroit Hotel is. That was the passenger depot. So passengers would get off there. The railroad, the train itself would continue down First Avenue South, which is what we're looking at right there. So First Avenue South will bring you directly onto Demon's Landing. The train would come off here and drop off all of its freight. So there was a pier that extended out to a depth of 12 feet where they could load and unload freight.
Wow.
And because of all the freight activity that was happening, there, you know, it was kind of a busy, smelly, working waterfront. And it became, also because there was no beach access at that time, it also became the place where people would go to recreate. So there was fishermen that would come here to fish. And so there was bait shops and net shops and all the things that went along with the fishing industry. People would also come. I'm going to flip this back on me for a second while I walk up to the bridge here. People would also come to swim here because you had no access to the barrier islands like we have now. You could only get there by ferry. So people would come to swim. There was a really cool toboggan slide that I wish we had today. And some of the leading businessmen in the city sort of realized, you know, this isn't a good use of our waterfront. We should try and beautify it. There was a movement at the time called the City Beautiful movement. And they really felt like they should beautify the waterfront so that tourists would come, even that early. So this is 1899. And they started actively, a man named William Straub started really actively pursuing the public ownership of the waterfront, and he was the editor of the St. Pete Times, so he was able to put a lot of editorials in the paper saying the public should own the waterfront. When that didn't work, he was not above a strategic ploy, so he got all of his wealthy friends in town to buy up the waterfront, and then he started saying in the newspaper that Yankees were buying the waterfront, and this was still, you know, a very southern town, not too long after the Civil War at this time, and that worked. That galvanized the community. They said, you know, no, Yankees aren't going to buy up our waterfront, and they encouraged the city to purchase it. Those men were always holding it in trust for the city anyway. So that's how our waterfront park system came to be. So in 1910, we got our first dedicated waterfront park, and we're going to walk to that location now. But it really started here where we are at Demon's Landing because this was where the pier was and this is where the business was sort of drawing to. And city leaders said, nah, that's not a good use of the waterfront. Let's move that farther down. Let's move the shipping and the port industry farther down to what is now known as Bayboro Harbor. And we're really unique in the country for having such a large public waterfront.
That's
I'm going to walk down a little bit to our next site, Lindsay.
Perfect. So I know that St. Petersburg was recently included in a list of some of the cities with the best park systems. This was a ranking by the Trust for Public Land, which protects parks for people. And they recently ranked St. Petersburg number 19 in the nation for best park systems. I believe that we have the third largest urban waterfront park system in North America, which is really phenomenal when you think about how, you know, metropolitan, of course, is urban park systems. But, you know, 1910, that's over a century ago. And I think about the foresight it took for someone like W.L. Straub and his friends to do that, and what a legacy that has left. You mentioning that Demon's Landing is where the railroad used to end. Now we see this park that hosts, you know, plays in the parks with American Stage, of course, which is kind of being put on hold right now, but is really a fantastic way to bring people together in the community. And if that land hadn't been set aside, we wouldn't have those opportunities. But also trying to envision what these places looked like in the past, what would appear more than a century ago have looked like, and trying to imagine the people and the movement of goods is, you know, it's fun to, you know, think about it that way. Yeah.
Well, and you know, it's interesting. I think we all try to be good neighbors here in St. Pete and Tampa. But if you want a comparison, look at Tampa. I mean, they did not make their waterfront public, and for many, many years, it was really an industrial waterfront. And now they're trying to catch up because they see what we've got over here, and they're now trying to recapture some of their waterfront with the Riverwalk, and they're doing a great job over there. But it's pretty easy to see if you look at a town like Jacksonville with their waterfront, these communities that did not have the vision and foresight. And speaking of which, I'm standing now in front of, so behind me is Pioneer Park, which actually lists, I'm going to flip the camera back around. There's a big obelisk in the middle there of the park. I don't know if you can see it, but it lists the names of 600 of the people that lived in St. Pete and worked to make St. Pete what it was in the years before 1912. That's the stopping date, and there's a bronze plaque. So it's kind of cool to come down here and look at some of those names. I also want to point out that big tower that we see back there, Bayfront Tower. That was our first waterfront condo. And as we walk a little bit farther down, I'm going to talk more about the evolution of our waterfront condo system. But I don't know if you can tell that this one, it's just steel and concrete for, I think it's 27 floors. And it goes straight down to the sidewalk. There's no shops, restaurants. And I'm going to talk about how that changed, what we learned from this building as we go a little bit farther down. I wanted to say one more thing about Demon's Landing and where the railroad pier was, because there was another important site here as well. It was called the South Mole, and it was the only area in St. Petersburg where African Americans were allowed to swim. So most of the white people would swim down at the foot of what became the municipal pier, which is the pier we think of today in St. Pete. And that's where white people would swim at Spa Beach. And this is in later years after after the founding of the city. And it became the black swimming area was here at South Mole, really because it was smelly and unattractive, and that's why that was chosen as, that was kind of the least favored place, and that's where black people were allowed to swim. So I always try not to overlook that aspect of our history as well. So that's also at that site. I'm going to walk down to our next site while you talk, Lindsay.
Great. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Monica. It's important that we don't lose that history, because we know that history is usually written by, people who have, an education or influence. And I think your group has done such a good job of sharing some of the important history of St. Petersburg, whether it's the beautiful things or the unfortunate occurrences that have happened. But I think that's important for us to understand really how our city has evolved and how we can be better stewards to all of the people in our community while we work on things like preserving land and historic buildings. Right. I want to address a couple questions that we've gotten, and then as you continue to our next place, a question about whether it's true that it's the contiguous largest waterfront park owned by taxpayers in the U.S. And I believe it's number 3, but Tony, I'm not positive about that, but it does show the importance of public ownership of land and the ability for people to have access to open spaces. One of the things that's one of our major platforms with Florida Conservation Voters is having consistent and sufficient funding for water and land conservation. And that includes programs like Florida Communities Trust, which are really valuable in more urban settings. Of course, Florida Forever is kind of the premier land conservation program, as well as the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program that helps to protect working landscapes like ranches and timber operations. But Florida Communities Trust on a state level is really important in communities like St. Petersburg, or helping to provide matching grants for nonprofits and for government entities. And then on the federal side, we've got an incredible program called the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which was actually started in 1964. It was just about a year ago, it was permanently reauthorized, but it does not have permanent funding. So we've learned from our partners at the National League of Conservation Voters that a bill is going to be heard on the US Senate floor next week. So we're really excited to try and drum up some more support from that. Of course, we would encourage both of our Florida state senators, Rubio and Scott, to co-sponsor that bill and help us get some movement on that and make sure that we have federal funding for some of the conservation programs. So Monica, I'm going to switch back to you,
right.
And where have you taken us right now?
Well, first off, I want to say hi to Tony, who asked that question, because I know Tony. Tony actually sold me my house.
Oh, wow.
All of my houses that I've ever bought, Tony has sold me. So hi, Tony. And I love that she asked that question about, is it true that we're the third largest waterfront in the U.S.? Because the Times, the now called Tampa Bay Times, asked this question several years ago, and they kind of went back to where that came from. And sort of our famous local historian, Ray Arsenault, who literally wrote the book on St. Pete history, who's also a very well-known civil rights historian nationally. He sort of owned up to starting that, he'd almost call it a rumor, years and years ago, based on sort of his own private research. He couldn't find any data to say, where is the largest public waterfront? So he did kind of an unofficial survey and looked at Vancouver and Chicago, which is the two that he placed us behind. So many years later, the Times delves into this and says, is this really true? And he kind of goes, well, they asked him, they said, do you know if this piece of information is true? And he goes, well, I was sort of the one that started that. So, and here's how I came to it. But then the Times itself did their own survey of it and basically found, it's not really something that can be proven or unproven, because there's not vast databases of who owns how much waterfront. And so the short answer to that is, yeah, it probably is true. Now, it's hard. It depends on how you define contiguous waterfront. For instance, we have 23 blocks downtown of contiguous waterfront. But if you, just south of where we were at Demon's Landing, it becomes the soccer field and the Dolly Museum. So those aren't parkland anymore. But then you jump back into parkland at Straub Park. So it depends on how you qualify it. But yeah, I think the Times concluded that it's basically true. It's safe to say that we are the third largest publicly owned waterfront in North America, behind Vancouver.
All right. We'll take it.
I'm standing now in front of the yacht club, the St. Pete Yacht Club. This building was built here in 1917. What I always think is interesting to point out about it is that in the 1921 hurricane, which is the last major hurricane to hit St. Pete, the entire first floor was underwater, and spurred real estate development in the higher points of the city. So neighborhoods like Allendale that were much higher really boomed after that, because people went, I don't want to live that close to the water and risk getting flooded. I'm going to walk on a little bit more, Lindsay.
So in St. Petersburg, and of course in Florida, higher ground is maybe 10 or 12 feet, which I think is where my house is. And I'm sitting in a 1922 bungalow right now. So I love historic preservation as well. But it's interesting to see that, we've been had this interesting relationship with water for decades, and probably even before that. I know that the city of St. Pete and other groups around the Tampa Bay region are, looking a lot more closely at sea level rise and things we can do to be more resilient as a region, as a state, and as a nation. But there's only so much we can do on our own without, progressive policies that are focusing on renewable energy and kind of shifting our reliance away from some of the dirty fossil fuels to more renewable sources. But climate change and sea level rise is something that we will, continue to push as one of our major pillars with the Florida Conservation Voter Movement. And it's great to be in a city where we have a sustainability officer, and we have a focus on those type of efforts, and a great dialogue with other groups in the region and around the state.
Yeah. So, Lindsay, I'm passing, I don't know if you can see the St. Pete Pier now,
Yeah.
which the opening date for the new pier has, keeps
Come
getting
and
pushed
gone.
back. I know. I
Yeah.
feel bad for the mayor who had these great plans for a May opening, and then the COVID pandemic has happened. But it's going to be fantastic. Now, this is the fourth, I believe, iteration of a pier in this location. So we had the railroad pier that I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
Down at the foot of First Avenue South. This pier is at First Avenue South. This pier that we're at now is at Second Avenue North. This is the municipal pier owned by the city. First one was here in 1913, and then it was damaged in a hurricane, and the famous $1 million pier replaced it in
Mm-hmm.
1921. Then that was demolished to make way for what is known as the Upside Down Pyramid Pier. That was
Mm-hmm.
demolished a few years ago, and now we're going to be on our fourth iteration. I also want to point out the world's prettiest bathroom.
Oh,
You can
yes.
see just past the little tractor and those trucks. That's called the Comfort Station. But around here by locals, it's really known as Little St. Mary's because it looks almost identical to a Catholic church on 4th Avenue South called St. Mary's Church. And the story goes that Henry Taylor, the architect, got stiffed by St. Mary's Church when he was building, when he got the contract to design the comfort station. So sort of as a way to thumb his nose at St. Mary's Church, he built the comfort station, which is a bathroom,
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same design as St. Mary's Church. Well, that's the story that you'll hear if you get on the trolley that goes through downtown St. Pete. And some maybe less scrupulous guides than myself will tell you that story. But the truth is, Taylor got this contract a year after St. Mary's had been built already. He was just fond of this design. It worked well for a very small piece of land like this one was, and it befit the grand nature of our waterfront to build something in this Romanesque style, in this octagonal shaped building. So that's why we have such a beautiful bathroom on the waterfront downtown St. Pete. And then right behind me, Lindsay, is...
Yeah, you want to flip the camera around? There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
So right behind me is the Museum of Fine Arts, which is one, along with the Yacht Club, really the only examples where waterfront parkland was deeded back to a private organization. And that was really done in the instance of the Museum of Fine Arts, at any rate, because it was seen to be a public good to have a fine art museum, and thought this would be the best space. So in 1965, the city deeded over 4.5 acres of the waterfront park to the Museum of Fine Arts. At that same time that the museum opened, this beautiful tree behind me, can you see that? Here, I'll flip around and give you a better view. Oh, no, that's not it. That's just an oak tree. Hold on.
Yeah. Not just an oak tree, but...
There, that tree back there. That's a kapok tree, or a bombax tree.
Yeah.
And that, anybody that knows St. Pete knows that was in February or March, that blooms in these stunning red flowers.
Amazing.
That tree was planted during the year of the opening of the Museum of Fine Arts in 1965. And
Wow.
It's brought joy to thousands ever since.
Wow. So if you're on the Facebook Live, raise your hand if you've climbed in that tree, because it's fantastic.
Definitely.
Climbed in that tree. It is. It's a very iconic. I think there's just down the block from there's some banyan trees, which are also one of our kind of iconic trees here in St. Petersburg. Of course, in these urban settings, we usually have a mixture of native trees like our live oaks and some of our pines, and then species that are introduced. I know that we don't have the time to go to the Gisela Kopsic Palm Arboretum today, but that's a really fun, that could be a whole tour in and of itself, which of course is trees from all over the place, not native to Florida, but a really beautiful representation and a place to just enjoy the diversity of all the plant life. Just like people love to live in Florida, plants and animals love to live here too, which is why we have maybe a problem with some of our invasive species like Brazilian pepper and pythons down in the Everglades.
So Lindsay, I was going to flip it around and show you those very banyan trees. Oops, I flipped it the wrong way. I'm going to show you those banyan trees. And then my plan was to just walk down to the Vannoy and talk about the development of our waterfront condos for a minute, and then end at the Vannoy, and then I'd be done. So let me flip this back around. You can see those banyan trees.
That sounds perfect.
The banyans, there we go. I mean, look at those. They're stunning. So these are probably less than 100 years old. Banyans were introduced to the United States by Firestone of tire fame because they were looking for an alternative source for rubber. So he gifted some banyan trees to Thomas Edison, who had an estate down in Fort Myers along with Henry Ford. If you've never been to the Ford Edison estates, you should absolutely go because they're stunning. And that's when the first banyan trees were introduced. These ones are pretty remarkable. I mean, I haven't seen, they usually find them more in South Florida, but because of the peninsular effect we have in St. Pete, because we're surrounded by water, we actually are a hospitable climate for them. So we've got some here and down by Mirror Lake. There's another one, and some down in South St. Pete as well. I'm going to walk over and show the waterfront condos here, and just wanted to kind of touch back upon what I was saying about Bayfront Tower. When it was designed in 1978, really no thought given to how it was sited on its land, how it could, how the design of a building could affect pedestrians and the way that space is used. And the city of St. Pete really learned from that and decided we weren't going to design buildings like that anymore. So now our waterfront condos are like this. And this is Park Shore. And this is a third, we had some progression in our zoning rules, and this is where we are now, where the big massive part of the building is set way back from the road, and it has a more pedestrian friendly 2 to 3 story building right on the sidewalk, which is far less intimidating when you're walking by it. It also has, this one has a restaurant, an ice cream shop, coffee shop. There's a restaurant down there. So they're required to put things like that in to encourage pedestrian activity, which really then extends the life and the use of our waterfront park system. So we're so lucky that this land was conserved for us, because now everybody can enjoy it. And so the wealthy, the lucky wealthy people that live in the Park Shore condominium still get their beautiful view, but then your kind of everyday person can come over and enjoy the park as well. And you can also enjoy it by, sitting at this restaurant and having dinner too. So it's just a great combination, and really some serious forethought on the part of our city founders. And I want to point out the Birchwood restaurant, hotel. That front part of this building here is a historic building, and then they landmarked it, used the tax incentives to help fund the addition that they made to the back of this building. So that's the only rooftop bar in St. Pete. And again, getting to take advantage of this great waterfront park view. So I'll walk down to the Vannoy, and I don't know how we are on time, Lindsay, you tell me, but we're about to wrap it up with the Vannoy.
We'll take a couple more minutes. I'll let you walk, maybe flip the camera on so we can see what you're seeing. And I'm going to answer a couple questions. First of all, Bill pointed out that it's pronounced Demens Landing, not demons. And Bill, we did talk about that earlier on the tour. I think it
should be pronounced Demens, but nobody says it that way.
Yeah, it's like the word, when you say it's not my forte, it's actually supposed to be pronounced it's not my fort, but no one pronounces that way. Yeah, I learned that in Reader's Digest many years ago. There was a question about how does the city of St. Pete pay for the parks? Well, some of these parks have been around for more than a century, so thank you to the people that came generations before us. Most local municipalities, and I don't know all of the funding structure of St. Pete, but usually there's a necessary combination of investments that could be from federal, state, and local sources. In Pinellas County, we have an additional penny sales tax called Penny for Pinellas that helps to fund some of the parks and infrastructure like boat ramps and bridges or libraries. St. Petersburg does have some dedicated funding for its park systems and recreation. I looked up, again, referencing the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is our kind of preeminent federal conservation funding program, which should be contributing $900 million a year to states within our nation. Again, that's the one that I mentioned is going to be discussed on the US Senate floor next week. It's been permanently reauthorized, but does not have permanent funding. St. Petersburg has had about 6 or 7 parks, not the ones that we're visiting today, but places like Lake Magori and Maximo Park, that receive some money from that funding source. So that's finding ways to leverage federal, state, and local funds is a way to really make some of these projects happen. There was a question that someone asked about protecting or making some of this waterfront more pedestrian friendly, how closing the street, that's something that Mayor Kreisman, I think Monica is just pointing this out. This stretch right here, which is also where the WUSF longest table event usually is, which is one of my favorite events. So thank you for that shout out, Scott Kaufman. So Mayor Rick Kreisman recently declared that we're going to keep this open for pedestrians and bikers. I have seen firsthand how many people are getting out and enjoying the parks, taking walks with their families. I've noticed that rollerblades are cool again. So, maybe I'll dust off my rollerblades and start doing that again. But, with the closing of many of our businesses and the need to stay in smaller family units, there's just been this resurgence of people getting outside, exercising, enjoying the weather, enjoying the fresh air. And that's certainly something that we encourage being done in a safe way. And it shows how vital having access to recreation and outdoor spaces are. And I think a lot of us are really excited to see how closing that section of the street will be. Of course, many cities have tried things like that. If you go to Barcelona or places in Denver, they have pedestrian areas, and I think it helps to spur that community feeling, and businesses benefit from it. So it's an exciting thing, and if it doesn't work out, I think our city leaders are smart enough to adaptively manage.
They're really responsive. Lindsay, I want to point out something. I'm a big runner, and my running group, we come down here all the time. And when they first put these barricades in the other day, they extended all the way to the sidewalk. There was just or to the curb. There was just a very small area that you could fit through. And I know a couple of people that sent in messages to the city, and I come out here today and look how wide the opening is now. And to me, that's just so St. Pete. We have a really responsive city government. The city is very focused on the community and the community enjoyment and livability in the city. I think that's a great thing about St. Pete. The last stop I wanted to point out is the Vannoy Hotel, which is right behind me, which was built in 1925. And if you've ever wondered why it's called the Vannoy Hotel, it's because it was built by a man named Amer Vannoy Lofner, and he lived right across the street. And he thought that his $1 million view might be worth $1 million. And so he built a hotel here. And it's designed, I'm going to flip it and so I can see it as well. This is a classic Mediterranean revival style building. And Mediterranean revival was something really invented in Florida. And the whole idea behind it was to try and entice people that were usually going to Europe to spend their money to stay here. So they really were trying to evoke the Mediterranean. And, why go to Italy and France when you can, get the same things here in Florida? You can get the beautiful weather, the gorgeous architecture. So that's why we coined this Mediterranean revival style of architecture. And it has those arches. Arches are very common in Med Rev style. It's usually a stucco building. This one's pink. They usually have towers like we have here, the beautiful tower that kind of looms over our waterfront park here. And when you're sitting, I will tell you, one of the best places in all of Florida to come and have a drink is on that veranda right there. Because when you sit on that veranda and then you get to look out on this gorgeous perspective of our waterfront parks. And I'm sure you've noticed, Lindsay, just as we've been talking, just how many people are using the parks for biking, walking. You probably noticed those high school graduates were over there getting their photos taken in front of the beautiful flowers. And in this location here is where Preserve the Burg does our movies in the park in May and October. We'll get 1,000 people out here to watch a movie. And we did that really to celebrate the waterfront park system and what a unique place we have and how lucky we are to have it and to have the leaders that had the foresight to not only preserve it in the first place, but leaders that we have now that really maintain it. And Lindsay, you know, people in St. Pete really jealously guard our waterfront. We are very, very protective of it. And I think you can see why, because it's a pretty stunning place.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tip the camera down and I'm going to show you, this is my shout out for you all. My Preserve the Burg movies in the park shirt. Yes, we would be, tomorrow night would be one of the movies in the park. So we're all sad that we can't do that this season, but hopefully we'll be back in October and, you know, coming years. So Monica, I know that you, that one of the things that Preserve the Burg offers to its members is tours like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys are going to bring things to your members and people of the public during this pandemic?
Yeah, actually, I was really glad you invited me to do this because we'd been talking about whether we should be exploring something like this. And I like to say I'm a late adopter. I am not an early adopter. So I always like people to show me that things work before I do them myself. And I think this is a great platform. So we may be exploring some of this. Thanks very much to Florida Conservation Voters for opening the door for us. But what we've been doing, spending a lot of time doing in the shutdown is really bulking up our newsletter with a lot of this content. So if you're not on the Preserve the Burg newsletter and you like these historical tidbits, I encourage you to go to our website, which is preservetheburg.org, and sign up because we send out a weekly email and it's full of all kinds of great insights about St. Pete history and things that are coming up, advocacy issues, threatened buildings, ways that you can get involved to help preserve some of these places. We actually just did a little trivia quiz on 11 buildings that we lost here in St. Pete. So you can go on our website and take those fun trivia quizzes to see how much you know about St. Pete. So we do a lot of things like that. We're expanding those kind of content delivery systems in the shutdown. It's been kind of fun. So we look forward to things getting back to normal though. So we can do, because we do offer regular walking tours every Saturday, October through April when we are not shut down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. This was such a special thing to do with you. So much fun. I know there's questions that we didn't get to. We'll answer some of these questions in our comments after we wrap up, questions about what the Senate bill number is. And I don't know that off the top of my head. You know, we could come back every week and tour a part of St. Pete, but hopefully this has inspired you as conservation voters and Preserve the Burg members to get more interested in where you live. Have a staycation, get some history books, and learn more about the history of the places. We are fortunate in St. Petersburg to have these parks. We will continue as Florida conservation voters to advocate for conservation, for our natural areas, for agriculture, for creating parks that are accessible to all people to help support healthy communities for everyone. So preservation and our cultural heritage certainly is a part of that. And thank you for sharing your amazing knowledge, Monica.
It's fun. Thanks for having me. And it just started sprinkling, so our timing was perfect.
All right. Well, we will wrap it up. Thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day and share this video with someone else. All right.
Thanks, Lindsay. Bye.
Thank you.